Tottenham Hotspur travel to Turf Moor, 3 p.m. kickoff on Saturday afternoon. Of course, last time out in the Premier League, there were boos at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium for the team and Spurs boss Thomas Frank, having lost 2-1 at home against West Ham. But it was like chalk and cheese. Tuesday evening, a fantastic performance. A lot of players missing in this Thomas Frank side and squad, but Tottenham Hotspur dared. And they did on Tuesday evening, and it was a much, much better performance. The only thing that I would say is that we should have scored a lot more goals. Gareth, what have you made of Tottenham in this past week? And Burnley, of course, are sitting in 19th at the moment.
It is a very, very hard one to work out with Tottenham at the moment. That first half that we've seen against Borussia Dortmund was kind of similar to the second half against Aston Villa in the FA Cup, where we kind of just went for it. And you could see the difference in players like Xavi Simons when he's getting the ball in good areas. Spurs are playing 1 and 2 touch football, and they were getting it wide and exposing Borussia Dortmund's setup. You know, Pedro Porro in that first half had the freedom of the park. Odegaard was causing all sorts of problems, and this was even before the red card, Chris. So, yes, you could say the red card didn't help Borussia Dortmund. Of course, it didn't. But you know, the pattern of how the first half was going it never really changed. With a red card, Spurs dominated that first half, and possibly our best performance, best for 45 minutes in my opinion under Thomas Frank, definitely as an attacking force when you factor in the opposition as well.
Yeah,
as you say, we could have been out of sight in that first half. The second half was kind of more reverting to type. Again, we don't know the ins and outs of what was said in the dressing room. Of course, Borussia Dortmund were always going to have some sort of response because they were nowhere near it in the first half, but 11v10. I don't think we used the extra man well in the second half, and it was almost as if, you know, when Thomas Frank and the players got into the change room, you know, that kind of excitement of being 2-0 kind of maybe factored on them. Like, we haven't won a game for a while. You know, we haven't won at home since we beat Slavia Prague in the last Champions League game. So maybe that kind of fear factor took in between the coaches and the players, and it was kind of a more dogged display in the second half. We out really looking in too much danger. But I think if a Tottenham team and their pump would have went on and probably put 3 or 4, maybe 5 past that Dortmund side, because they were there for the taking. Really, apart from that Pedro Porro opportunity at the very end of the game, can't remember too many more opportunities we created in that second half. But look, all that is really irrelevant when you win the game 2-0 and you play as well as you did in the first half. But it just seems at the minute, Chris, that we're not capable of stringing a 90-minute performance together. Thomas Frank's been criticised for his comments referencing the last 8 games. It's been a lot better. And I can kind of understand what he means in terms of if you take little snapshots of each game, there's been little bits. You think about that second half against Villa, the first half against Dortmund, the Bournemouth game. I think in the first half, when we started the game, we played quite well. We were pushing for a goal towards the end of the game against Bournemouth as well when we conceded. So there has been some good displays and spells, but that isn't enough. And the results haven't been good enough as well. And when you think about some of the other performances, Crystal Palace, I don't think we were that good, even though we won. Brentford away was very, very poor. Sunderland, again, first 45 minutes was okay. Second half was poor. So he will look at any kind of angle to say there has been slight improvement compared to maybe the Arsenal game, the Chelsea game, which was really, really bad. But we had set such a low bar, it was going to be very difficult for us not to show some sort of improvement. But we're still way off, Chris. And that result against West Ham was an absolute hammer blow. Because if you think how bad West Ham have been in recent weeks before that, you know, a lot of my sort of friends who are fans of our clubs says to me, even though you're struggling, I just cannot see any outcome other than Spurs beating West Ham. We were very, very poor. You know, there wasn't really enough in the game. A lot of players underperformed. You know, you think about Xavi Simons' performance against West Ham, the Dortmund performance, it was chalk and cheese. But you could also say that the way we played against Dortmund suited Xavi Simons. It's no coincidence, Chris, that Xavi Simons' best performances have been when Spurs have went on the front foot. So this sit back and negative and stiff passages of play does not suit a player like Xavi Simons. And I'm not trying to compare him to Christian Eriksen, but I think he has that player on the team at the moment that if you get Xavi Simons on the ball and get him playing and getting him on the right areas and you play the way he needs the team to play, I think you see a much better Spurs. He is that player that can see things that some of the other players can't at the moment. So I've been encouraged with some of his recent performances, and I think, in time he will be a real success for us. And I did doubt him initially whether he would suit to this English style of play, the Premier League, but I do think there's been serious improvements there, and he's building more in confidence. And Chris, one other thing on Xavi Simons, I love the reaction he has when he gives the ball away. He always tries to go and win it back, and he's quite aggressive as well. We've seen that against Liverpool. He overstepped it with a red card, but I think that'll help him as well, that he's not afraid to put his foot on.
Gareth, you've been extremely critical. I think it's very fair to say you've been extremely critical of Thomas Frank this season, particularly in recent games, performances, results, etc. Is there a part of you, and I feel like I've had this conversation a lot since Tuesday night, is there a part of you that has changed your mind or has made you wonder whether Spurs can play more like we did against Dortmund than we have done in previous games where we haven't picked up results? I get your point, and I get Thomas Frank's point where you're picking out positives in games. He mentions the last 7-8 matches, and there are moments in these games. But as you also rightly said, we're not doing it collectively over 90 minutes, which I think is a big issue this season, particularly when we're almost at the end of January. But is there a part of you that thinks or has made you wonder since Tuesday night, this can actually work under Thomas Frank? Give him time.
I think it would need to be over a more consistent run of games. Like you say, he's pointed out some positives there, but it's not enough for me to change my mind at this stage. If we go and beat Burnley and it's convincing, and we go and beat Frankfurt next week, albeit a Frankfurt team that have really nothing to play for, but that's a dangerous. Everyone thinks, oh, that's a good thing, but Frankfurt, the pressure's off. They might play, with more freedom, try and give their fans something to kickstart their season, because there's been a new manager change there as well. So that's not taken for granted. We know how difficult it was there last season when we won 1-0. It was a difficult game to get into that semi-final. So, but there is an opportunity across these two games for Thomas Frank to buy himself more time. And look, it's starting to get to the point now, Chris, whereas I have said that I think we should make a change and get an interim in. But if it gets to the stage where we pick up the odd result here and there, and there is slight performances for 30 minutes here and 40 minutes there, I think the club will probably roll with it until the summer, because the longer it goes on now, would there be any value in bringing in an interim for 2.5 months? If you think about it, there'll be an international break now in March. You'll come back, it's April. Who realistically is going to take on that job, unless it's somebody that's maybe in the club already, unless it is a Johnny Heitengate, he see it through. I don't really see now a Robbie Keane or a Jurgen Klinsmann or a Harry Redknapp coming in for that short of a spell. So I think if Thomas Frank gets a few results over the next few games, he'll probably get through to the end of the season. And then there'll be re-evaluation, because, look, there is some big names that's going to become available after the World Cup. One being a very much a fan favourite in Mauricio Pochettino. So he's going to have to do a lot more than, reference 30-minute spells or 45-minute spells in a run of games to convince the board and the fans that he should be the manager next season. But that result against Dortmund does give him a little bit of breathing space. But if we go to Burnley and get beaten, people are going to forget about the Borussia Dortmund result, because Burnley, again, are one of the weaker teams in the league. And the worrying record that's setting on at Spurs is Bournemouth couldn't win for a while, beat Spurs. West Ham couldn't win for a while, beat Spurs. Burnley are actually on the longest Premier League run without a win. And if that was to happen 3 times in the 1 month, it wouldn't say a lot about this Tottenham side under Thomas Frank, that they're actually a bit of a cure for teams that are going through bad spells. So it's a huge game for the manager. Again, we keep saying it every week, but Saturday is another big game, because anything less than a 1 will not be tolerated by the fans.
Yeah, absolutely. Gareth, of course, on the opening weekend of the Premier League campaign, 25-26, Spurs beat Burnley 3-0. Of course, Richarlison scoring a couple of great goals. Where do you think the clubs are now compared to when we played them the first time at the opening weekend?
Well, from a Burnley perspective, I think when you looked at all the squads at the start of the season, I always thought that they were probably the weakest of all 20. I think because Wolves have been doing so poorly until recently, that's probably the only reason Burnley are in bottom of the league. I think there's every chance now, the way Wolves have started getting some momentum together, that Burnley will probably end up finishing in last position. And that's probably where they should be on merit. So I don't think there's too many surprises with Burnley. I think when Spurs beat Burnley, let's go back. Even this, we were at the Super Cup game, Chris, in Udine, and we've seen a lot of positives in that display, despite losing on penalties. Then the Burnley result was very positive. Then they go and beat Man City, and you think, oh my God, this could be a real success. But there hasn't been too many moments since those opening games they shout about this season. Borussia Dortmund probably is the one, if you think about on Tuesday night, in between Man City and Borussia Dortmund. I can't think of any other statement victories out there. So, yes, there were some ones at Everton and West Ham, but at the time, West Ham were in a mess. I think Graham Potter was sacked, and the Everton result was kind of a set-piece victory, even though it was a 3-0 one. But yeah, it's been a very tough watch for fans this year, Chris. You've been to every game. There's been more boos than cheers. There's not a lot of positivity. I've obviously been going to the games for a number of years now, and I've been to a lot of games last season, and I've been to a lot of games this season. And I think even this season, it's more toxic than it was last season, because I think at times last year under Ange Postecoglou, even though we were losing games, the team was creating chances, they were scoring goals, and the games had a bit more of an entertainment value about it. At the end of the day, it is all about results, and I get that. But I think when you're not getting results, you need to have some sort of excitement in the games. And for a lot of the games, it's been very, very difficult to watch. And West Ham was another one of those on Saturday. And I have to say, I always sit in the South Stand, Chris, when I go to the games, and I've never seen so much animosity and anger in them stands. It probably didn't help the way West Ham scored at the end, but even at 1-1, I think there was going to be boos at the end anyway, because a lot of people were leaving early and a lot of people were booing the team throughout the game. So I think that probably added an hour layer to it. But 1-1, I think there would have been as much boos as there was at the end at full time anyway.
Surely you'd take another 17th place finish for another European trophy.
Well, I mean, if we're all in Budapest again, I definitely. I would take 17th again if it got us to Budapest, if that was the trade-off. But look, this is a much more difficult competition. We've got a great opportunity. I know we're speaking about the Burnley game, but that is a great opportunity next week. They go and get a real upper hand in this Champions League. Look, we've seen it last season with Liverpool. It doesn't always guarantee a nice draw. Liverpool topped it last year and then drew PSG, who knocked them out and they won the competition. So cup football you just don't know sometimes, but when you're still in there, and if you give yourself the best possible chance, in all likelihood, Liverpool were a bit unlucky last year to draw PSG, but in all likelihood, we would have a decent last 16 draw if we beat Frankfurt and qualify for the last 16 automatically. We'll play one of the playoff teams. We'll also have the second leg at home. And if we can somehow get a favour from either Liverpool or Real Madrid, we could actually finish in the top 4 teams, which would mean we would be also at home in the quarterfinal of the Champions League in the second leg. So I think all those things can really help you out in these cup runs. But we need to get back to one ways in the league too, Chris, because it's unlikely we're going to win the Champions League. I think that's very unlikely we're going to win that. Even the most deluded Spurs fan out there would probably admit that. So we need to make sure we're going to be back in Europe next year, Chris, because I know you were devastated in Ange's first season, although the team was doing well, that you miss out on all the European trips. And at the moment, we look like we're going to miss out for next year in Europe. So, the fans love the European trips. You always speak very highly of them and going to different places. So we need to make sure we're in Europe as well next season.
Absolutely. And it should always be an expectation at Spurs, particularly with, how everyone goes on about the stadium, the training facilities, etc. And, the players that you want coming through the door, particularly in the summer window, you want to be playing in the top European competitions. Absolutely. Let's go through some of the match facts and stats here. Burnley have lost 6 of their last 7 Premier League games against Spurs, including each of their last 4 in a row since a 1-0 home win back in Feb 2022. Tottenham averaged 2.2 goals per game in the Premier League against Burnley, 41 goals in 19 games, only averaging more against Hull City among sides that they have faced 10 plus times, which is 2.3. Tottenham are unbeaten in their last 13 Premier League away games against promoted sides, winning 11, drawing 2, since a 3-1 defeat at Leeds United at Elland Road in May 2021. And Tottenham have lost 4 of their last 8 Premier League games against sides in the relegation zone. This is a problem, Gareth. Winning 3, drawing 1, including a 2-1 loss against West Ham last time out, as we've just spoken about. Spurs haven't lost consecutive league games, with both coming against sides in the bottom 3 since March 1997, and that was against West Ham and Nottingham Forest. On that subject, what sort of game are you expecting at Turf Moor on Saturday? And talk to me about Scott Parker, the type of job that he's done there. How impressed have you been with him? Because, of course, you know, got them promoted, but, of course, coming to the Premier League, it's very, very tough. And also, Gareth, you know, your football knowledge is exceptional. Talk to me about the key players for this Burnley side on Saturday.
Well, on the game itself, I think it's going to be. I don't expect it to be as open as it kind of was in that first half against Dortmund. I think Burnley will sacrifice possession. They're going to be trying to make it very difficult to beat. Spurs will probably have to try and, you know, Thomas Frank away from home's been kind of letting the opposition kind of come on the Tottenham and maybe trying to play counter attack or set pieces. But I think this will be different. I think we'll probably have to almost treat this like a home game where we'll dominate possession. Burnley will play for counter-attacks. They'll play for set pieces themselves. I think it'll be scrappy, Chris. Both teams in pretty poor form in the league. Scott Parker will know that if they can keep a clean sheet, Spurs haven't been keeping clean sheets recently in the Premier League. You think about that West Ham game, even the Villa game in the FA Cup, you know, conceding really soft goals. Sunderland, you could kind of feel that we didn't kill them off. And I think he'll realise as long as Spurs are even only 1 goal up, that Burnley can definitely get something out of this game. So they'll want to try and keep it as tight as possible. Interestingly, one of their key players, he wasn't really getting a look in at the start of the season for Burnley. He did score at Anfield last week. It's a name that some of the viewers will know, is Marcus Edwards. And I think he's been a little bit unlucky with his time at Burnley, that I think because they were playing very defensive, dogged football, he's more of a luxury player. But he has started to get more games recently off the bench in recent weeks, and I think he's earned himself a start, and he'll want to score against Spurs again, because if you remember, he did score against Spurs for Sporting Lisbon in the Champions League. So he will be up for this game, and I think he will be the player that Spurs are going to be having to keep quiet. They've also, one of their key players and captain is Josh Cullen. He's actually recently picked up an ACL injury, so that's a massive blow for Burnley. He plays as their number 6. Also a massive blow for my country, Ireland, in terms of getting to the World Cup, the playoffs in March. He will not be part of that, so you could say that's a good thing for Spurs, that he is kind of their main man in the middle. But I do expect it to be a scrappy game, Chris, and I kind of feel like 1 goal either way will be in it, or a draw.
Well, before we do get the score predictions, no team has scored more headed goals, 9, more goals from corners, 11, or more goals via defenders, 7, than Tottenham in the Premier League this season. Interesting stats there. Tottenham have had just 235 shots in the Premier League this season, with only 5 teams registering fewer. Tottenham's average of 10.7 shots per game, and that isn't on target, by the way, is the lowest on record in a single campaign. And this is since the 97-98 campaign. And this is why a lot of Spurs fans have been saying that watching Spurs this season is like watching Tottenham in the 90s, because all of these stats do add up. And also, what we've said a lot of the time as well, Gareth, particularly this season, is there's a real emphasis on Spurs attacking down the right-hand side. We've seen Mohamed Kudus do it, and Pedro Porro, because Tottenham's Pedro Porro has played more passes into the box, 180, and delivered more open play crosses, 113, than any other player in the Premier League this season, with the Spaniard also creating the most chances among defenders, and that is 32. A big key player for Tottenham, actually, Pedro Porro. Talk to me about the your predicted starting 11, because of course we had a lot of players missing on Tuesday. We've got a lot of injuries right now. Players, of course, weren't registered for the Champions League squad. Of course, Pape Matar Sarr has come back. This game is probably a little bit early for him. Predicted starting 11, who do you want to see?
Well, Vicario will be in goal. I thought Pedro Porro was very good in the first half against Borussia Dortmund. So I think he'll play in there. Just what you said about there is a heavy emphasis on his crosses. And I think with Dominic Solanke being back, I mean, we've really missed him, Chris. You know, his first touch, his hold-up play, bringing our players into the game, that made a huge difference on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Well, you know, he played 70 minutes, which is really positive. Is he going to be recovered to play an hour game? I think we're probably going to have to play him anyway, because I think we're stuck. But I'll come to that in a bit when we get to the attack. But Pedro Porro, Romero, and Van de Ven will come back. Obviously, he was suspended against Borussia Dortmund. He'll come back in. Interesting one at left back, because I mean, Jed Spence in that first half was like everything you want from a winger, and we just haven't had that really. Apart from maybe earlier on in the season, we could also, but we haven't really had that down the left side. And it was like watching, it was almost as if we signed a player and it was his first game, because it was just incredible in that first half. So, you know, will he go with Doggy left back? I think we have to. I think we go with Doggy left back. Midfield, Conor Gallagher will come back in. Of course, he was unregistered against Borussia Dortmund. Huge loss with Lucas Bergvall, Chris, and that kind of counteracts the signing of Gallagher now, because we signed Conor Gallagher because we were short, and now we've lost another long-term injury to a player. Rumours he's out for up to 3 months. So I would imagine that Archie Gray plays alongside Conor Gallagher, and it'll be Xavi Simons in front. And then I would go Odegaard on the right, Spence on the left, and Solanke up front. And people might laugh at the Spence. I mean, I laughed at it, to be honest, when I seen the starting and Spence was playing out the left side. But I don't think you can drop him after that. I think you have to give him another chance and see how he does. Because let's be honest, although Tell's been doing a bit better, you know, there's no one really nailed down that left side. So why not give it to a player that's, you know, it was arguably the best 45-minute display from a left-sided player this season. So he has to play for me. And Solanke through the middle, who I thought was outstanding against Borussia Dortmund. But Chris, just on that, you know, you think about this January window, and you think about, you know, we've lost Bentancur, Kudos, and Bergvall now to long-term injuries. We need to go onto the market again. I know it could lead to problems down the line, but we can't rely on 11 players playing Champions League and Premier League. You know, if we're going to do anything in the Champions League, and if we're going to get ourselves back into Europe, whether that be Conference League, Europa League, or even maybe Champions League, you know, the results of the English teams now, it's nearly guaranteed that there's going to be 5 English teams in the Champions League next year, which means there'll be 2 Europa League teams and 1 Conference League. So there's going to be 8 English teams again. So the top 8 will be enough for Europe. So we need to go out now in the last week of the window. I know we signed Sousa tonight, but he is one more for the future. We need to go out and bring in some players, especially in that midfield area for me. I know Polina will be back shortly, but we're really short. I mean, and yes, we've been a little bit unfortunate with injuries, but if we're going to save the season, we need personnel. We need players that come in and make a difference between now and May. So I really hope the club knuckle down now in the last sort of 9-10 days of the window and get some bodies in that can really make a difference.
Gareth, 67% of Tottenham's Premier League points this season have come during away games. That's 18 out of 27. Only league leaders Arsenal, 21, have earned more points on the road than Spurs, 18. Why is that? Why do Spurs seem to perform away and in cup competitions rather than Premier League home games?
Well, I'll give you the Premier League side of it first. I think the players really struggle to deal with the pressure at home. I think that record that's going on quite a long time now, it encourages away teams to come to Spurs and think, well, you know what's going to happen here. If Spurs don't start on the front foot and it start making mistakes, giving the ball away, playing backwards, going back to Vicario from the halfway line, what's going to happen? Ooh, and then that transfers to the players. They get nervous. The manager's getting absolutely hammered. And then all of a sudden, these away teams are smelling blood. And I think West Ham probably couldn't believe their luck. That's how toxic it was on Saturday. Thomas Franks had a pop at the fans, but I think he's learning by the weeks that it's funny he keeps praising the fans now. In the last couple of press conferences saying how great they are, because I think he knows he has to try and keep them on side. Not so much that he wants to have a great relationship with the fans, but he knows that if the players play in a more positive atmosphere, more chance of getting more results. And obviously, the better the results are, the more time he gets. So he will know that. I don't dislike him. I think he is a very smart man. He's a very likable man. But I just think at the minute, and it's not the right fit long term. But look, I hope I'm proven wrong. I hope Dortmund one can kickstart a bit of a run. But if we don't bring in any players, Chris, in the next week of the window, I don't think it will matter who the manager is, because you can't rely on 11, 12, 13 fit players between now and April, and that is realistic. So he needs help in the transfer window. We'll see how much the club are behind him. We've heard all the positive PR from Vinay Vikatesham. He's going to have to back this manager now, or he will have to sack him, because there's no manager could survive with that amount of injuries now.
Gareth, what's your score prediction? I'm going to go for a 2-0 Spurs win. I just think that, after that performance on Tuesday, of course, we are expecting a lot more. Like you said, we need to get back to winning ways. I feel like this is a crucial game for Tottenham, and I really am hoping that Tottenham deliver and bring home the 3 points from Burnley on Saturday, because we need to start climbing up that Premier League table. And like you said about the European spots, I think that always we should be expecting to be finishing in a European spot. Yes, we finished 17th last year, but we should be in a much, much higher position. I just hope that we have an all-round performance on Saturday and, like I said, deliver. What do you reckon?
I'm going to go 1-0 Spurs, Chris, and I hope by the end of this transfer window we've got some more players to talk about, because this predicted 11 at the minute picks itself. There's no one really else we can put under the team.
Yeah. Right. Thank you for that.